Hi guys, this is Miss Raina coming to you from C347 here at MacArthur High School to talk about the soil in terms of food production. So you can see with this graphic that food production uses quite a lot of other resources, and in fact almost every other unit, when I asked you what is the biggest impact on air quality, for example, or the biggest impact on water quality, the biggest impact on many of these other things that we've studied, the answer has been agriculture, otherwise known as food production. So it's a big issue for us. Traditionally, what was done was we would plant, a long time ago, before all of this stuff started becoming industrialized, we would plant several different varieties of, food crops in our area, so that we had polyvarietal cultivation and we had two or more different things growing in the same area. Sometimes, rather than cutting down the trees to plant, we would just plant around the trees. Another word for what we used to do is called polyculture. So different plants were planted together, and a really common example was corn, beans, and squash. So the squash would cover the ground, keep weeds from coming in, the corn would grow straight up, and the beans would kind of coil around the corn. It protected us from a lot of things that happen now. So erosion is a big problem here in the United States. There's its definition. Again, you can pause, stop, rewind anytime you need to write things down. The importance of erosion and of protecting our soil from erosion comes from all of these risks to erosion. So if we start disturbing ecosystems and removing the root systems, then we don't have anything to hold down the soil. Also, if we plow things under, if we do a whole lot of irrigation, then what happens is we end up losing layers of soil. Well, every inch of soil takes arguably 100 years to make. So here's a couple of different kinds, and again, I believe this is part of your vocabulary assignment, so you guys should have these already. And we'll look at a couple of examples. So here's a big example of gully erosion. And what's going on here is the soil is moving very fast because there's water moving very fast. Also, you'll notice there's not a whole lot of plant life holding down the soil, and so there's not very much to protect it from moving away. Worldwide, it's a pretty serious problem wherever the population densities are the highest, and you can see in the worldwide map where the soil is eroding away the fastest. Here in the United States, we've reduced that soil erosion since 1985 by about 40%. So there is some positive news. Here's some different kinds of erosion because of water. So this can happen because the water hits the soil at a severe angle, maybe because the soil is on a mountainside, or when the water is peeling off layers of soil. Here are a couple of other kinds: mass slippage, like a mudslide, or rill erosion, like it looks like little rivers or little rivulets. And they kind of like sweep away microchannels. Here's gully erosion, which is basically big rill erosion, and big giant chunks of soil ended up being washed away. But if you notice here, there's nothing growing to hold the soil down. Wind erosion is a different story. So that happens when wind hits the soil, not because water hits the soil. Saltation is what we call it when you almost say like the soil particles jump. So they have so much momentum in one soil particle that's flying through the air and it's blowing through the wind, and it starts to hit the soil under it, it kicks up more. This happens over and over again. In extreme cases, you get big dust storms like happen in North Texas. Here's one in Lubbock. When you get lots and lots of dust suspended in the air, you call it a suspension. So that's one of your vocabulary words as well. Surface creep is what we call it when the soil kind of like moves very slowly across a big area of land. If you have a landslide, well, that's a really fast surface creep. Desertification is the big time risk when you lose all that topsoil. So if all of that topsoil goes away in a delicate area like what we have here, a grassland, then you end up with lots of parent material but not a whole lot of nutrition. And what that means in a semi-arid environment like a lot of South and Central Texas is that the plants won't have very much of a chance to grab on, and the building up of soil underneath will take a long time, and so we'll be stuck living in desert, whereas before we were in a pretty ideal grassland. Here's another risk that comes because of irrigation. So oftentimes it's really hard to irrigate with pure, perfect, fresh water. There's a little bit of salt in it. And so every year that salt builds up, builds up, builds up. And you end up with soil that's completely non-usable because it's built up so many years of salt from irrigation. So what are some things that we can do? Well, here are some prevention strategies. We can just reduce the need to irrigate, or we can switch to salt-tolerant crops. Alternatively, if it's already happened, there are some options that we have to clean up. So here's one case of what salinization might look like. And this was the same picture we looked at for an example of friability. So one thing happens and it affects a lot of other aspects of the soil. In addition, you might end up severely changing the pH of the soil. And what that means is there's not enough acid in there, then a lot of the nutrients can't dissolve out anymore. What can we do to control the soils, to control soil erosion? Well, here's an example of something called a shelter belt. And you can plant trees or shrubs around the perimeter of your land and kind of prevent a lot of that soil from eroding away. Minimum tillage means you till as little as possible. So you every year, instead of tilling the ground under every time you plant, maybe you plant things over what's already there, or you give the land a little bit of a rest in between. There's some options here for some more sustainable agriculture. So if you reduce that tilling, then you get a lot of benefits here. Contour farming is very common on a hillside, so that as the rain falls down, it doesn't wash your soil away. What you do is you plant kind of like according to elevation, according to the contour of the land. Terracing is, I would say, like a more extreme example of this. It looked like stairs going down a hillside or going down, I don't know, an incline. And it helps retain water for each successive stair. So here's, kind of like a neat example of what terracing or what contour planting might look like. It's nice because it stops the wind from going so quickly, and it stops the water from going so quickly, and so it'll stop the erosion from happening so extremely. Strip cropping means you alternate corn, then beans, then corn, then beans. In other words, you don't allow a big swath of land to be flat and covered with one thing only. Here's cover cropping or alley cropping, and what you do is maybe you have some orchard trees or just plain trees, and you plant something in between. It's convenient for our area of the world because oftentimes we need some protection from the sun. So center pivot irrigation was one of your vocabulary words, and it looks just like a big huge sprinkler that's going around a center pivot. Here we've got, I wanted to highlight that one because that was a lot of misconceptions in there. I just wanted to quickly show you this slide because we're doing some stuff in class about some of the biggest impacts on our health that directly result from the way that we produce food. So I wanted you guys to be able to see just in one graphic what some of those impacts can be. Finally, I wanted to just introduce to you a couple of ideas, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth. But there are definitely things that you as an individual and us as a society can do to curb a lot of the negative effects of some of these issues that we've been talking about in class. So thank you for sticking with me through this last flip video about food production, and we'll see you in class tomorrow.